Hey everyone, hope all is well. My name is Myles Dyer and welcome to the Quest for Global Empathy. I want to say a huge thank you for the continued support that keeps coming in from right across the planet. Lots of new people keep tuning in to this show, and for something that only started last year, I'm really proud that it's become a grassroots funded operation. It does mean that the upload schedule has been quite sporadic, and for that I do apologise, but at the same time I can only explain that as being a part of the fact that we are running on limited resources. However, we are so close to hitting our first target, so if you haven't supported us yet and would like to, please visit patreon.com/Myles Dyer. You can become a founding supporter for as little as $10 a month, and with that you can get a limited edition Quest for Global Empathy shirt, and already we've been receiving photos from people wearing those shirts, which has been so amazing to see. So yeah, check that out, and we'll continue to see this grow, and we will eventually get to the point where we do just keep uploading these once a month, and beyond that, hopefully 2 a month, and so on and so on. Don't forget, you can also check us out on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play. So with all that said, let's get on with the show. Today, I'm joined by a good friend of mine. He's a journalist, writer, and a filmmaker, Ben Cook. Ben, thanks for coming in. How you doing?
Hello, have we begun?
We have begun.
Okay.
This is the start.
Okay, hi.
There was quite a bit of prep beforehand.
There was.
But we got there.
Listeners and viewers will never know how long I've been waiting to do this podcast. Like, literally sat here waiting.
It is the joys of doing just an audio podcast. You know, it's just people's ears you got to cater for.
This is the other thing I forgot until I walked into the room, that you're filming this as well. Or I'd have, I don't know, run a comb through my hair or something.
You look good.
Well, no, I don't, Myles. No need to lie. I thought there was one thing I had to remember about this podcast, and that it wasn't being recorded in London. That was the thing I was sure I was going to forget. Because living in London, you kind of become complacent and think that everything's in London. It's in Reading, and I was so intent on remembering that this is in Reading, not London, that I forgot that it was being filmed. But there we go.
But here we are.
Here we are.
And it's good.
How are you? No one ever asks you that at the beginning of your podcast. How are you, Myles?
I'm doing really good, and I'm really buzzing with this podcast because it's going to be a slow burner, and that's not a negative. It's
this specific episode.
No, the show as a whole, in terms of the overall growth of it, and it's a long-term project. And when it first got made, thanks to grant money from YouTube and their Creators for Change initiative, a lot of the projects they funded were all individual sort of viral videos, you know, whereas mine, it was like, I'm going to be doing 3 2-hour pieces. And
I love that. I'm a huge fan of long form. We were talking about this the other day when you invited me on this. I love the idea that, you know, you'll sit down with someone and chat for 2 hours. I mean, it's a bit daunting at the minute because we're right at the start of this. I'm like, what are we going to talk about for 2 hours? But there are not enough places where you get proper long form. Some magazines still do it. When they interview someone, you'll get like a 10,000 word piece. But often when people are talking on anything from the political interview to interviewing actors who are appearing in film, anything, it's usually just sort of 2 or 3 minute sound bites. And
I'm glad you mentioned that, you know, a bit of nerves in terms of where this is going to go, because the most common question I get asked is, so what is the sort of prep work before the interview?
That's what I asked. Yeah, I said.
And I say, well, firstly, it's not an interview, it's a discussion, and the only question I prep them with is, how's it going? Yeah. And nicely you turned it onto me.
To you. Have you read these books then? This is Is this just to look clever? The empathetic
is it just to look clever? No, these two are very much at the heart of what I do. So I've spoken about this before, the empathic civilization. Right. There's a great RSA arts animation on YouTube. If you just look up the empathic civilization, which goes through the history of empathy and in terms of human beings, and which is really good. And then the one under it is the new human rights movement by Peter Joseph, who was the founder of the Zeitgeist movement. And it's very much how we need new structures in society.
I thought it might be like Wetherspoons, where they put books on the shelf just to make you look clever.
Well,
just to try and make you forget you're in a Wetherspoons.
Well,
you actually have read those. So
you've tapped in something else that I'm definitely still trying to learn with this podcast, which is how to decorate the table, because the table's pretty cool, but I'm always trying to think of stuff to put on here, because when you look at, I mean, if you've ever seen the Joe Rogan Experience, his desk is just filled with really cool random stuff. I mean, I
Yeah.
can't even tell you what's on it, but he's got really cool stuff on the table. But also, we're not in here permanently, so
And also, I don't know. I think you've got like this focuses the mind. There's not too much to get distracted by. I quite like that.
yeah, that's
I think it
true.
works for your podcast.
But the other thing I was going to say about when YouTube were giving me the grant money for the initial 3 episodes, I kind of felt sorry for them because they had a deadline to submit the content because they had to review it all. And so they had like 40, 45 people, and they all sent like 2-3 minute videos. I think some were 10 minutes. And there was me with 3 2-hour.
Yeah.
But they loved it, fortunately. And I didn't see them say that with gritted teeth. Like, they genuinely... I actually gave them the audio versions as well.
Well, I think you're a bit like me, and I think you'd prefer not to make things shorter when you can make them longer. I mean, if 1,000 words will do, you'll go for the full 1,000. In fact, you'll go over as opposed to trying to. I mean, I hate editing stuff down. I mean, this is why I was saying to you, the reason I love the idea of this podcast is that because it's long form, and I feel that about all sorts of stuff. If you can go longer, if you can allow more space and time just to explore.
I think it's about not going for the middle ground, because you've got to be one or the other. People either want quick content they can watch on their phone and on lunch breaks,
And there's a place for that. Sure,
yeah. Or they want long form. If you go in between, you're kind of I think you got to go for one or the other.
I've always thought. I mean, there was a huge drive like around the time that I was starting the YouTube thing that we'll probably talk about in a bit. But there was a huge drive to sort of say, videos shouldn't be longer than 3 minutes, and people's attention span isn't longer than 30 seconds if you're trying to send out a particular message. There's some truth in that, but I've always thought people have far sort of sturdier attention spans than a lot of, I don't know, execs and advertisers and so on will give them credit for. And people will just sit and listen to. You found with this podcast, people will sit and they'll spend their lunch hour listening to the first half, and the next lunch hour listening to the second half, or car journeys, or on their way to work. People have plenty of time to devour long form content if it's good enough and if you put it out there.
A friend of mine was listening to one on her 1 hour train journey, and the train broke down, so it was 2 hours, and she was like, so I've got to listen to it. Oh, I was like, great.
Yeah, perfect.
But you're right. I mean, when I used to work in London, it was an hour and a half each way, and so that's quite a few podcasts you can listen to. And this might sound cliche, but when you're listening to music on a long journey, after every song, you're unfortunately reminded that only 3 to 5 minutes has passed.
Yeah.
Whereas in a podcast, when the arc of a conversation has gone, to the next part, firstly, it doesn't just end, it then flows, but that could be like 20, 30 minutes. I mean, when I'm looking at highlight clips, I feel like this is a good way of telling the listeners and viewers a bit about the workings behind the scenes with this, but I don't come to this with gotcha topics or this is the highlight I want to go for. Yeah. There are times when I'll have conversations and in my head I'll go, okay, that's definitely going to be a highlight clip. But there's and so the highlights are put online, but it's not done with that intention. But the other thing I was going to mention when you said about liking to do long form content, for me that has been one of the biggest battles in my mind over the 14 years I've been doing YouTube, in the sense of, I think one of the hardest things to get your head out of is, especially if you're talking about serious topics, deep topics, you want to be full in your analysis, and anything you miss, you feel like, okay, then that doesn't, I can't cut corners. But the other thing you have to consider is viewers and listeners will not miss something that they didn't know was there in the first place. And so you can over-engineer. And so the biggest issue, and I did a video on this quite a few years ago, which was called The Message versus the Messenger. And I've asked a lot of YouTubers over the years about it, and I don't think anyone's got an answer, and it'll be good to hear your thoughts on this, which is, when I started on YouTube, I was very much about, doing travel vlogs and just vlogging about my life. And so that's all about the messenger. It was about my life and who I am. Yeah. There were sometimes messages thrown in there and things I wanted to talk about, but it was about me. And they got lots of views. But then I went through this stage of becoming more of an activist, and I was like, actually, I don't really want it to all be about me. I want it to be about these messages I want to put out there. And so I went completely the opposite direction, where I was scripting videos and it was all about putting the message out there. But by doing it, viewership went down, not only because the topics were serious and less commercial, but I think also because I wouldn't say they were heartless. A lot of heart went into them, and it was me talking with passion. But you need the balance, because the messenger is the context. That's the person you trust and you buy into. That's the person that you want to find out about their lives, so that when they're telling you a message, you can see where they're coming from. Whereas on the flip side, it is about ensuring that, you know, they do take more information than what they came to the video in the first place.
You call it balance. I called it, when I did the YouTube thing, I'd call it tricking people. I think, like I would. You'd reel people in by the promise of some cute boys with their shirts off. I mean, you would, absolutely, in the thumbnail, in the title, in the opening skit, and then, you know, after 5 minutes of that, you'd start talking about the Syrian refugee crisis, and people would tend to stick with it. There'd be some drop off, but no, and you know, you're laughing, but that's literally what we did.
Although the algorithm is much better dealing with that now, because if there are lots of videos on the Syrian refugee crisis, they look at watch time, and the ones with the biggest drop off, which is I'm clicking it for that, and it's about something else.
Yeah, but we sort of found that, you know, like, there wouldn't be. I mean, we did that becoming. I did this documentary called Becoming YouTube. I know you know this because you were in it, but
and we're going to talk about it.
We will talk about it. There'll be people who don't know. It was sort of half documentary, half sketch show. And there was a half an hour video all about the Syrian refugee crisis, where myself and Jack Howard went out to Jordan and visited Syrian refugee camps, like the works. It was a proper serious thing, but also with sort of comedy cutaways and jokes and sort of, you know, digs at pointless blog TV and all that sort of stuff. And so it wasn't really about getting a balance as such, as it was sort of reeling people in with one thing. And you see it now with, I mean, I not a day has gone by in the last month without me thinking about Avengers Endgame and how brilliant that was. And part of what made it brilliant was people sort of went in expecting one film, and it sort of was that. It did tick all the boxes.
Yeah, let's be careful with spoilers here, even though I think it's been long enough.
Well, it gave you all the things that you would want, but it wasn't like there were enough twists in there that you kind
even very early on.
We can say who's killed off very early on, can't we? Oh, God. I mean, just block your ears for like 10 seconds. The fact that they kill off the main villain in the first in the opening minutes, you go, oh, this is not the film.
So what they're going to do for the
What the hell are they going to do
hours?
for so it's a bit like being at the start of this podcast. But what are they going to do for the next 2.5 hours? And then it delivers. And then what they do with the sort of the leaping forward in time and all sorts of stuff, where you go, oh, this is not or they're actually playing it out for real. This is not the quick reversal of what happened in the first film. And I love, you know, any TV series, film, podcast, you know, anything that will do that, will make you sort of think it's one thing and then deliver. I always tried with the YouTube stuff that I did to give the audience the thing they didn't know they wanted.
Yes.
Until they're there watching it and listening, you know. And actually, you know, the sort of the main tool in your arsenal there is always humour. I mean, if you found a drop off in your views. And I did watch your videos back then. I remember enjoying them, but I can't. It's so many years ago now.
Well, that's a good thing to remember.
But maybe if there was a drop off, you needed more jokes and more shirtless boys. Like that's
but what I'm saying is,
you know, however serious the topic.
The first videos I did were comedy, and I did a lot of satirical videos.
And they got the views.
And they got the views. Well, there you go. But that's what I'm saying. I went away from it because it was just. For me, YouTube has always been a journey of self-discovery, because you're putting yourself out there, and I've always tried different things. But no, I agree. You know, I went so far the other way that I think I've now brought it more into the middle with my later videos, and now I'm doing podcasting. This is what I've always wanted to do. I mean, this has been a project I wanted to do for about 8-9 years.
It's because, like me, you like the sound of your own voice. I mean, it's true. You always have, and so do I on some level. I mean, I think you've got to do YouTubing maybe. But you like, you know, I mean, you'll listen back to this, yeah? You'll listen, yeah. I mean, I always did all my own. I'd watch my videos, count half the views were mine. Like this guy's funny, you know. Yeah, and this is the perfect medium for you, and I can say that to you because I mean, I'm the same. I love. You know, I'll talk if you let me. And
also, I have to listen back because I've got to edit it.
Yeah, that's true as well.
No, there is a lot of truth to that. And one of the reasons I wanted you to come on this show was because of the fact that I will call you an old school YouTuber. And
kinda, yeah. I mean, I'm weird. I'm often like I'm lumped in with a lot of the old school YouTube. I've made 12 videos. I mean, my entire YouTube career was I mean, I'm being slightly disingenuous. There were a few extra bits and pieces. There was a little short film, a little trailer and things. But really, it was. I made 12 videos over the course of 18 months. But I happened to be doing it at a time, like the perfect time to be doing that. The last possible time to be sort of becoming a reasonably successful YouTuber just by sort of starting from scratch. I'm not sure how easy it is to do that now.
So you did this documentary it came out in 2012 in December.
Yeah.
Describe what made you come up with it to begin with, and what was the process like?
I've interviewed my career originally, and still now, like I suppose, is a journalist. Although I've always had like job titles and careers that have sort of been slightly embarrassing, because even journalists, you think, oh, what, investigative journalism? You're speaking truth to power, right? You're exposing corruption within government. No, I watch TV for a living, and for me, the idea of a big scoop is like that time I interviewed the Jonas Brothers or something. It's not quite speaking truth to power, although I don't know. But my background was as an entertainment journalist. I spent a lot of time writing about TV for a living, and I found myself in kind of 2011, 2012, knowing a number of people, 2 or 3 people who were doing the YouTube thing. Charlie McDonnell, Alex Day, and sort of within my socials, from them, knowing a few other people like you. I'd heard of a Myles Dyer. I wasn't quite sure what he did.
What's remarkable in the timeline is 2012 is quite a long time ago. But
it's
for me,
I'm struggling to, as I'm on, even just describing what becoming YouTubers.
But, I regard that as old school. But that was halfway through my YouTube time, because I started in 2006.
Yeah.
And that's quite bizarre to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't like, oh God, I feel so old. 2012. I mean, 2012 does just feel like. I mean, if you asked me and I didn't have time to think about it, I'd say, oh, it was 3 years ago. Oh no, maybe 4. It was fucking 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus Christ. And so I was kind of intrigued by this was before people really knew what YouTubers were. It was still very kind of niche, this little kind of world, this weird sort of community. And so I sort of wanted in on it. It's like, this looks fun, like just making stuff with your mates. That's the best possible thing, right? Creative endeavors with friends. And I wanted to make a documentary about it. I wanted to sort of have my cake and eat it, essentially. I wanted to become a YouTuber, whilst also documenting it. And so over the course of about a year, I filmed this 12-part documentary series called Becoming YouTube, which, as I said earlier, was sort of half documentary, and there was some serious stuff in there, and it genuinely did try and analyze the YouTube world. There was
a lot of talking heads.
Heads. You were one of the talking heads, but it kept sort of doing sketches and silly stuff and sort of fantasy sequences. It was also sort of born out of the idea of what happens if you. I was fascinated by building up something you mentioned a bit about with this podcast. What happens if you about building up an audience, and an audience's loyalty to a creator and all that sort of stuff. The idea I had was to build up an audience over the course of 10 episodes, and then round about episode 10, tell everyone to fuck off. Like, literally look down the barrel of the lens and say, I'm not enjoying this anymore. Please leave me alone. And that's what we did. And then burst into song. And so it was sort of this weird kind of mishmash of a series. But it came around at a time when, like, the mainstream media was just starting, whatever that means, but newspapers and
sure.
telly was just starting to show an interest in YouTubers. Every headline in every newspaper about YouTubers would be the same thing. It would be Myles Dyer, the most famous person you've never heard of. It would always be that, the most famous person you've never heard of. Whereas now, cut forward 7 years and you've got Joe Sugg doing Strictly. Like, YouTubers are mainstream, but back then they weren't. So people, a lot of mainstream media outlets kind of pounced on Becoming YouTube and used it as a case study or as a basis of an article. Or I was being interviewed for newspapers and everything from sort of appearing on Woman's Hour to being interviewed on by NME to everything to sort of to talk about this new phenomena. Sounds weird to say it now in 2019, but it was back then a new phenomena, like the YouTuber, the social media star. And so that's sort of what Becoming YouTube is, and it's still available online at youtube.com/9brassmonkeys. Yeah, that's it.
I love that you had to remember it that way.
It's all there.
And they did the viewish wise, because they were. How long were the episodes? They were about.
I mean, I think that this was absolutely when I started doing it. I was told time and time again by other YouTubers, by YouTube itself, because they very quickly saw what I was doing, and I became a bit of a darling of YouTube for a little while. And they were like, just don't make videos that are longer than 3 minutes. Like, not longer than 5 minutes. And my first ever YouTube video, the first episode of Becoming YouTube, was 20 minutes, think the second one was 20, and then the rest were about half an hour each.
Because I remember there was this whole conversation. Oh, people do like long form, and it's like,
what's
yes,
he doing? But like millions of people watched, and it's sort of. I mean, now you've got lots of people. You know, I currently I'm doing a lot of editing for a lot of LA YouTubers, and it's not unusual for them to upload videos that are 20-something minutes long, half an hour long. But back then, received wisdom, the YouTube playbook stated was remember the YouTube playbook?
I've got it. I was actually looking at it today when clearing out the
computers.
Really? I've still got it. Yeah.
That terrible advice. Because what the playbook sort of did is it kind of, I think, it discouraged you to try new things, because it's and maybe this is still a bit of a problem with YouTube, but it encourages you to, video should be this long, the end board should be at this place, you should make sure that in the title you put the, and you go, but it discourages people from trying new things and going, well, how about instead we make it half an hour single take things, or you know, how about we just do an entirely animated, or we burst into song halfway through a video on Siri. I mean, let's try different things.
But you can also understand why they did it, which was, this is a formula that works, and it was kind of a starting point. So like, how I function as a consultant in video strategy is, I have on my computer, I think I made it when I was at The Guardian, or maybe when I was at Channel Flipper YouTube Network, I've got this spreadsheet with like a checklist of, I think it's like 188 things that you should aim to do when making a video.
Wow,
so it's like,
you know what I said earlier about editing things down, like,
right,
you definitely
right,
can.
right.
Like that's
but the point I was going to make was, context is important, because I don't go through their channel with them and say it needs to do 188. I actually go, what is relevant to them?
Sure.
So and so like, having an end card might not necessarily be the sort of content they're doing. And
we were saying this in the car on the way here, that like you're, because I did the whole roundabout 2012, 13, 14, YouTube would send me off doing kind of what you do, send me off to companies, big advertising agencies and mainstream media, like companies and corporations and things, to tell them how to do YouTube. But my job back then was a lot easier, because 2012, 13, 14, people didn't even know what, you know, part of my job was just explaining what YouTube, explaining what a Zoella is, and why isn't she doing TV? And you go, well, because, you know, whereas I think now in 2019 there's a far better understanding from all sides about how to use, you know, by brands and by companies, how to use social media, how to use YouTube. You know, your parents will sort of know what a YouTuber is, more or less now.
But even 13 years later, still get asked by people, how do you make money from it? It's really interesting. And actually that is a legitimate
question. That's because most YouTubers don't understand that.
Yep.
Like, how do you make money? It's just luck. I mean, you take every brand deal going and hope for the best. Hope that occasionally, you know, you operate on a loss again and again, and then hope that someone will come along and offer you a ridiculous amount of money to make a one-shot video or something. I mean, sell a bit of merch. It's hard to make money now. I mean, it's sort of always been YouTube's great unanswerable question. How do you make money? I still don't really know.
No, it's interesting, and I do remember. I can't remember exactly the date, but I remember being invited on Sky News. I just want to get the date for context.
We've all done Sky. Actually, no, I haven't done Sky News.
I mean, that's not something I would go on. It was. It says 8 years ago, so the date would have been. September the 2nd, 2010.
Myles is just Googling himself, if you can't see.
So 9 years ago, I was on Sky News talking about the YouTube top 10 rich list, and I wasn't on it, just to clarify.
Oh, God.
But it was Shane Dawson, Phil DeFranco, lots of great names, and I was interviewed, I'm going to say against, because that's how Sky News does it, against a spokesperson for YouTube, who was saying, this is great, it shows you that content creators can make revenue. And although in hindsight of how I was 9 years ago, I think I could have articulated myself better, but the point I was trying to make was, YouTube has done a lot for me, which is give me a free platform to upload content.
Yeah.
It means I can tour the world meeting friends I've made online, and
same.
have and learn all these skills that have helped me with jobs and that. However, I'd be cautious to put this message out there that everyone can make money off YouTube, because it's only a small percentage of people.
Tiny. I mean, my parents still, like, up until up until 2 or 3 years ago, still I hadn't uploaded in since about 2014. But my parents, who they moved from London to Brighton about 6 or 7 years ago, so they hear a lot in the local news about like Alfie and Zoella because they're also based in Brighton. And they'd always be like, but why aren't you rich like them? And I'm like, yeah, but they're a tiny 0.01% of people who YouTube, mum, will become millionaires, and the rest of us will just about break even if we're lucky. Like,
I always compare it to Hollywood, and with actors and actresses who go to Hollywood, they get jobs like waiting and that, and they just keep applying for auditions hoping to get that big break, and it's a small percentage that does it. But the difference with YouTube is the barrier to entry is lower than going to Hollywood, and you know, because you can do it from your home on your phone now. So the barrier to entry is lower, which means that it's even more saturated. There's more competition, and it basically means it's harder to make a living. But if you make it, you're going to make it unlike any people before. And when I've taught at schools and I get asked about, like, you know, you ask young people, what do you want to be when you're older? And I'm not saying
huge
this.
numbers say YouTubers.
And they do. And so the question I ask them is, about what? And then they stop and think. And so the message I always try and put out there when I do workshops is, it's really important to think about, what do you care about? Because I think there were times, again, like maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago when I did videos. I did one about Candy Crush Saga when that mobile game came out. It did 1 million views. I knew how to make videos like it. And I remember at the time making a conscious decision to not just do those videos because it isn't what I wanted to do. I did it because I wanted to try it out and see if I still... I didn't just preach about making content that was marketable, but could I actually do it? But the slow burn thing I talked about with this podcast has kind of been my YouTube story since 2006, which is, throughout all these years, I've not been a massive YouTuber. I mean, in the early days, because I was one of 100 vloggers, I was well known in that sense. But I still have enjoyed the experience, and the experiences the doors it's opened to me to is stuff I wouldn't have traded for anything. And so I tell people that if you're chasing money or viewing figures, you will never be satisfied, because you can always have plus $1 plus 1 view.
Well, yeah, no, I half agree. You see, firstly, I think if you're on any artistic endeavor, you should never be satisfied. So
I agree with that.
I think not being satisfied by doing YouTube for whatever reason is not necessarily a bad thing. And I think there is a difference, I think, between chasing views and chasing money. And I know often they sort of end up kind of meaning.
But what
the same
thing.
But for me, like when I make like the idea of, I've never been able to do things like keep a diary, because the idea of sort of pouring your heart into something that people wouldn't see. I mean, what's the point? Right, and I get that there's sort of a point for some people, but for me, I absolutely chased views because I want as many people to see the thing. But chasing money was never an issue. I lost. But you've
chased views doing content you enjoyed
and
you believed
in.
So that's what I'm saying is it's not
pure. Not it wasn't.
I'm saying
cynical.
because there's a lot of young people that go, I just want to be a YouTuber because of the fame. As in the concept of it, and so I just tell them, well, think about what that is, because luckily, young kids are...
see what happened to some of those other YouTubers who wanted to be famous.
Well, young people are growing up
for them.
Young people are growing up in a time now where niche communities now have huge, vibrant audiences, because all these verticals of different types of sport have huge... It's connected the dots around the world.
That's the internet. I mean, we are of the last generation, I guess, you and I, who grew up sort of both with the internet and without it. And I was still quite... I've told people this before, but like I remember when my dad took me along to the library, because he was a librarian. He worked at the library, and I must have been about, I don't know, 11 or something. And he sat me down at a computer and was like, "I'm going to show you this thing called the internet." And I remember it because I didn't know what to sort of search for. I ended up like searching for, I think, a Doctor Who and The Simpsons. Those are my two things I searched for, because I couldn't think what else to Google. And then I went home, and because I was that kind of kid, I went home and wrote an essay about it, just off my own back, about like what the World Wide Web was. So I remember being introduced to the internet, and I remember growing up without it, and then how in sort of by the time I got to my late teens, it was a bit more of a thing. And certainly by the time I got to my early 20s, it was definitely like all about the internet. And so I feel quite fortunate to have that perspective, which maybe when I was becoming YouTube, a lot of the people I was documenting did, because they were a bit younger. A lot of them had sort of got to like 9-10 years old and as far as they were concerned, I mean, Hank Green used to say, as far as they were concerned, Wikipedia had always been the source. And I love that. Like, as far as they're concerned, Wikipedia or YouTube had always been there.
Do you remember Microsoft? Was it called Encyclopedia? Was it just called Microsoft Encyclopedia?
No,
it was the disc you got, and it was like an encyclopedia
on a
disc.
Vaguely do remember.
And
like,
and Carter.
Carter,
Yeah.
And Jeeves. We remember Jeeves like he was a member of our own family. Now kids are growing up, they won't know who Jeeves was.
Yeah. And there was Evil Jeeves, which was a little
Was
Easter
there?
egg, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know. Yeah,
it was really good.
I saw someone on Twitter the other day say, "What if Jeeves was just some guy who would just Google stuff for you, just trying to be helpful?"
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's all he was.
I can't remember my first experience of
the internet.
Like, but I do.
I don't think most people can. I'm lucky.
Yeah,
because I went home and wrote an
Yeah.
essay, I can remember that. But I think most people, like, if you could remember the first time you sat down and
Sure.
because it must have blown your mind.
Yeah. I do remember though. It's supposedly quite a common bonding experience for people with their dads of my age was playing the game Doom.
Oh right, yeah.
Because I can't remember how I was young playing that, but my dad got on very well with a neighbour up the street, and he brought his laptop round, and they sat on the kitchen table, and they had their two laptops set up with Doom. I think it was Doom 2 on it, and you had a LAN cable, so you had this big cable that came into your laptop, went into theirs, and you played a co-op. It was a first-person shooter for anyone who doesn't know Doom. It's a classic.
I'm also not a gamer.
Yeah.
I think co-op's a shot.
But it was a cooperative mission where you were both sharing a digital space. Like, you could see the other person, and you went through killing demons and doing objectives together. But that moment of seeing the other person, like across the table in that space, I just remember being blown away of like, this is life-changing. And
that's why I have very little patience for this argument, or when people, especially people of a certain age, maybe will kind of will get quite irate at seeing lots of young people just staring into their phones. You go, yeah, but if I'd have told me even 10 years ago what the internet would be now, but certainly me 20 years ago, that I would have had like just on my phone all of human knowledge, I wouldn't have looked up for weeks. Like, I don't blame anyone.
Yeah.
Of course you'd. Or if we told the Victoria, like, imagine.
Well, there's a meme.
Modern magic.
There's a meme of a quote of people saying, "Oh, people never talk to each other these days," and it's a load of
people reading newspapers on the train.
On the
train,
train,
yeah. I mean, people have always been,
But to your point, well, it's no longer just a form of information, it's a communication tool, and so is it any wonder? But what a lot of tech developers are focusing on now, and even in gaming, like Pokemon Go, which was all about people walking around parks or looking at their screen.
I remember it well. I was a massive Pokemon goer for a whole week. Do you remember that week when everyone was a Pokemon goer? Oh, yeah.
I played it for a solid year.
I went to the park and,
It was great, but the developers spoke a lot about
the park.
Yeah. They talked a lot about how their focus when developing technology for Pokemon Go was, in what ways can we reduce the amount of time the user has to look at their screen?
Right.
So they brought the Pokemon Go Plus, which was the clickable thing to catch Pokemon. They're now looking at AR, augmented reality. So us having glasses where we have all the very Black Mirror, although Black Mirror is a bit of a cliche because Black Mirror wasn't the first to come up with a lot of these concepts, but it is popular culture. But I think that is the next stage of technology, is how do we stop people looking at their screens? Because I can't remember what country it was, but there was a country where they had to bring out at road crossings, I think it was like a light that goes across, because everyone was looking at their phones when the crossing says stop walking. Oh, sorry, stop walking, wait. The laser would go across so that people staring at their phone would know not to cross.
Oh, sweet, I thought you were going to say it was one of them like jamming things that would mean that you in order to cross the road, your phone would automatically switch off or something. Or
it was in the Netherlands. They're very progressive, it sounds about right. Yeah.
Let's go with that, Netherlands.
But road safety groups have attacked the idea, saying it rewards bad behaviour. What? Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be able to put it on the screen for everyone, but it's an actual laser that comes out on both sides. And then it goes green. It looks like a lightsaber on the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's all right. It seems a bit much, but...
I think about a lot of the times I've been texting while walking, and it's bad.
Yeah, no, I do it all the time. I'll watch whole little episodes of TV shows, and if I've got 10 minutes left of a TV show, I'll watch it on the way to I hate us. Yeah.
I think I've done that a few times. It's why I think podcasts are great, 'cause you can be aware. But then it's also, being aware of your surroundings. And I couldn't ever wear noise-cancelling headphones while walking around London.
Oh, no, I do.
Do you?
Yeah. I love it. Yeah.
And you haven't ever...
No,
almost been hit.
Maybe almost been hit. But
you wouldn't have known.
You don't know if it's an almost. But it's a price worth paying. Like, yeah, but I'm the sort of person. Yeah, I'm the sort of person that's quite easily irritated by just like other people anyway.
God,
so I don't really.
And you're in London.
And I'm in London, so I don't really want to have to listen to people. And I love London, but I don't want to have to listen to other people. And
I mean, I've always been on the belief that in London we are literally killing each other with high blood pressure. Because if you're a fast walker, which I definitely am, when I come back to Reading and I'm in the street, I'm walking past everyone because of being in London.
Sure, yeah.
If you are a fast walker and you're held up behind someone slow, it stresses you out. And if you're a slow walker and people constantly brushing past you, or their blood pressure goes up as well.
What's the word? I suppose politically, I'm more left leaning, so I will listen to arguments about we should love each other, we should take care of each other as a society, we should help those less fortunate than ourselves, etc., etc. All that goes out the window when I'm on an escalator in London and someone dares to stand on the left-hand side. No, it's the right-hand side. Why don't you know? Look what everyone else. It's not even okay. Maybe you can't read English and you can't read the signs if you're from a different. That's fine. But look what everyone else is doing. That should give you a hint. Have a bit of a Anyway, I don't know. We're all awful people.
Yeah. I mean, he's probably going to hate me for saying this. My dad is really bad with road rage. I mean, he doesn't bring out a baseball bat, but if someone cuts him up, he will swear and get really angry. And we're half an hour down the road and he's still going. I'm like, dude, they're not even thinking about this right now. This is such wasted energy. And as a result, I think it prevented me from being as much of a rager. I say as much because there are still times where I'm like...
So I don't drive, luckily enough, but this is what I found very freeing about doing YouTube, because you could I made a conscious decision when I start, because I wasn't going in blind. I'd sort of been making this. I'd been filming people and interviewing people like you for this documentary before I posted my first video, so I knew some of the pitfalls. And one of the pitfalls that not necessarily I wasn't told, but I observed was just that you had to, once you sort of give yourself to the internet, then they sort of feel like it sort of feels like it owns you, So I decided from the off to not entirely be myself in my YouTube videos, but to be what version of myself, or to be an angrier version of myself. So all these things, whether it's people walking on the wrong side of the street or escalator or whatever, I could be the version of myself on YouTube that wasn't quite real life me, but it also sort of, in a sense, was a truer, more pure version of myself and what I really think about stuff than any other version I've ever presented to the world. Because it was the version of me that, hiding behind a character and a screen, the sort of the double whammy, could sort of say whatever. So I'd just shout at my audience, and I'd be pretty horrible. And people would come up to me at YouTube events and ask me to, my friend Chloe really loves you. Will you speak into the camera and tell her to fuck off? Number of times I've had to do that to tell people, go into camera. Hi Chloe, I'm Ben from 9 Bus Monkeys. Fuck off. Yeah. Loads of videos of me doing that, and so and
now they're out there that could one day be used out of context if you're ever going to run as a politician.
Yeah.
On the campaign trail.
But I it was for all the kind of getting angry, all my potential sort of road rage or getting angry at people was all channeled into. It was a great release, YouTube. For that, it was a wonderful version of myself I was able to put out there. It was like therapy.
Yeah, the sort of image you put out there, because when you script a video or you're editing it, you are editing. I mean, there's always a question about, do you ever really meet a true version of someone else? And the question is really, and again, actually we could talk about Black Mirror. There's the episode where the woman loses her other half, and she gets an app that downloads all his social media and starts having conversations. And the whole premise is, are you really? Does it matter that you're chatting to a fake person or not? Is the experience real? And I think that in real time conversations like we're having now, you and I are both able to manipulate the conversation and sort of get a sense of who the person is and what they are. Whereas when you see a video, that is just a snapshot in time.
Yeah, that was the big thing that we used to talk when we talk at YouTube events to to younger people who wanted to YouTube, often that would be a big topic of conversation about, well, the version of YouTubers that you see online isn't their real selves. But it was slightly disingenuous because it sort of assumes that any of us has like an essential us.
Yep.
Like that if you burrow down, there'll be essential essence that is Myles Dyer.
Right.
I mean, we're also with politicians when they maybe slip up slightly and they say something they shouldn't have, and we go, you see, that's the essential them. But
yeah.
I don't really, I never have much time for those sorts of arguments because I'm not sure any of us has an essential us. We're all slightly different in front of friends or parents or lovers or when we're, we might be different when we go into a school to talk to people
Right.
as opposed to when we go into an advertising agency or a company and talk to people, and we might be different when we're in a rush and a bit stressed when we're on the underground on the escalator as opposed to when we're sat, just chatting reasonably relaxed in a podcast. But there's lots of different versions of us, and we evolve over time. The version of me that I am now is quite different to the version of me that was in 2012 or 2000 or earlier, So I don't know. We're just soup. We're all soup.
It is true. I mean, I can't remember. There was always the fact about how, is it every 12 years, every cell in your body is completely changed? Like you're
maybe. So it's probably more frequent than that.
Yeah.
But you know what? The theme of the emerging theme of this podcast is it sounds about right. Don't bother Googling it. Yeah, every 12 years. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, why not? No, don't Google it. Let's go with it. Let's go with it. I think it sounds about right. I'd say our skin probably renews more often than, that must be every I don't know, I'm going to sound really stupid now, every 4 weeks or something, 4 months. Every 7 months I'm going to go with.
LiveScience.com.
What do I win? A car?
This is an amazing answer. LiveScience.com says, every 7 years, brackets, or 10, depending on which story you hear.
Oh, well, thanks for, who was that who gave that answer?
Thanks, Live Science, for that.
Live Science. You know what they say about Live Science?
Seven.
Always.
We replace all our cells every 7 to 10 years.
Okay.
But
what about skin though?
That being it, like everything.
Yeah, but
yeah.
But surely skin.
Oh, your skin.
Skin is way more.
Cool. Oh yeah, sure, yeah. But in 7 and 10, you are definitely an entirely new person.
Okay.
Unless there's one cell that's just been a bit sneaky.
Yeah, and yeah. I mean, sure.
Yeah.
if you're just talking about flesh and bone, but I mean,
in psychology, it's called schema.
That's not very empathetic, is it? We're far more than just meat and
well, I remember a secondary school when we went to church for hearing a talk, as you'd normally do from church.
Did you go to a Church of England? Because I went to Church of England primary school.
I did.
So I did the whole church thing once or twice a week. Yeah.
And then in secondary school, it wasn't Church of England, but they definitely did lots of church stuff. Yeah. But I remember the priest was telling a story. He basically calculated like all the chemicals in the human body and how much it comes to, and it's like £100. And so he then basically.
What do you mean £100?
If you to buy all the chemicals and the material to make a human being, right, it would come to. I mean, I don't know where he looked that up, but it sounds about right.
He sounds one dodgy priest.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really go to priests for scientifically
in the graveyard
accurate.
Again, Father.
But I thought it. I mean, it stayed with me. I thought it was a really interesting point he was making, which is, but is that really what we value? And actually, it's a big discussion point in America at the moment with their healthcare system and whether they should go to single payer, because there's this discussion by those that are all for the free market saying, well, you let the market sort it out, whereas progressives and people on the left are saying
probably doesn't really work with healthcare.
Healthcare is not a commodity, because if you've got cancer and you are going to die, you would pay anything. And so how can you let the market solve that out when it's actually just being predatory on people's desperation?
I agree.
Yeah. But the schema theories is the whole. It's about the fact that our brain has blueprints, so that when you go to different situations, you know how to act in a certain way. So you'll have a blueprint in your mind that when you go to a shop, you know to take it off the shelf and then to pay for it and then leave. Well,
things we've learnt, you mean, over the
So
or it's stuff that's inbuilt.
Well. To my knowledge, schema theories, it's inbuilt in terms of the process. But yes, we take blueprints from our surroundings, from repetition and doing things, and so we don't have to learn every time we go into a new shop. we still
How it
know
works.
how it works.
Yeah.
And you know that when you go to a funeral, you don't dress up as a clown
Yeah.
unless it's a strange
Clown's funeral.
a clown's funeral. Yeah. But my favourite ever lyric from a metal song that I always mention, but it taps right into this, is by a band called Misery Signals, and it's "We're just rehearsing who we think we are."
Yeah,
and for me, that is the heart of the human condition. Of we are forever trying to work out who we are. We're not static. We are constantly changing. A constant theme on this podcast is talking about vulnerabilities and reflecting on our past. There are lots of things I've done in my past that I'm horrified and ashamed of. But
I sometimes think that, but then I kind of look at other people and go, "Oh no, I'm fine."
yeah, no, it's true.
Like, my biggest shame, and I sort of think, "Oh yeah," but like we know people who've done like far worse, and you go, "Oh right, yeah, no, I'm probably." I think on balance, I'm a reasonably good person.
Sure,
I think,
and I also think it's context about have you got a track record within yourself of showing a willingness to change, or do people just change once they've got found out about stuff?
Oh yeah, sure.
And so on the first episode I talked about telling racist jokes when I was at primary school because you got the cheap laugh and it was a power play, and so if that story had come out because now I'd told a load of racist jokes and there was a backlash, and I said, "Oh, but I've clearly learnt my ways." That'd be a much harder sell than for me voluntarily.
Well, I think it depends. I mean, what you did, because I did listen to that podcast, and from what I remember, you weren't trying to. I have a lot less sympathy for people who try and sort of excuse the jokes. It's to say, as I think you did, well, I wouldn't tell those jokes now, and I've learned and evolved, and I'm a different. But fine. I have less sympathy with people who will sort of go, "Oh well, they were different times."
Oh
like,
right, yeah.
Somehow go, "Oh well, yeah, it was the 1970s. It was before racism was bad." You go, "Yeah, it was still just as bad." Like you can absolutely judge the past by today's standards. Like so we should, but you can also go, "I've changed, I've evolved." I mean, I was listening to a podcast which I've talked to you about before, which I try and listen to as often as I can, which is Richard Herring's Leicester Square Theatre podcast, and he had on at the time of recording this week's guest was Matt Lucas, who talks about doing things like Little Britain, which I loved as a kid. I was probably a teenager, I think. I love Little Britain, and Little Britain was only sort of when was it? The early 2000s.
I'm really interested to hear what you're about to tell me.
And now
some of the sketches.
I did a few, maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Didn't they black up?
Oh, they blacked up.
Yeah.
But they'd sort of get people like Rob Brydon in to do sketches where he'd black up as well. And I did watch a couple of episodes of Little Britain with my friend Dan a couple of years ago, and both of us were just. We didn't laugh once, and sat there sort of open-mouthed at what they got away with. But also, I am so aware that, like, I loved that show and I laughed a lot. Every episode, I laughed a lot, and I'd rewatch episodes and laugh a lot. And now, as rewatching these episodes, I'm not laughing once and sitting there kind of horrified. So I was like, well, has it changed or have we? Well, stupid question. Obviously, it hasn't changed. It's here on Netflix, unedited. It's like we've changed. For better or for worse, we've definitely changed. And Matt Lucas was talking a bit about, he's talked quite eloquently about, well, look, I mean, he would not do some of the stuff he did, him and David Walliams did for Little Britain. You wouldn't do that now. It was only like 2000. I think Come Fly With Me was, Google it quickly, when was Come Fly With Me? Because I think Come Fly With Me was like 2011 and they were blacking up.
Were they? That was...
I think they only did one, or maybe
2010.
2010. Come Fly With Me, if you don't know, because it's not as famous as Little Britain, but it was like it was a version of Little Britain kind of humour, but set in an airport.
Right.
And sort of it was kind of parodying those sorts of early reality shows where they'd follow people around, the workers of Stansted Airport in a typical day, that kind of thing. And yeah, I mean they'd black up, they'd play Chinese characters, black characters, and just horrible sort of stereotypes. And you go 2010, 2010. Oh my God. Like, this isn't sort of like the black and white minstrel show, which you hear about from like the 70s, although that continued live well into the 80s. But like, it's not far off.
No.
And how did, and I'm not putting this on the pro, it does need to be put there. That's a separate discussion about the program maker's responsibility. I mean, I'm putting it on me here. I laughed at that and I found it funny, and I'd go into school the next day and all we'd be talking about was last night's episode of Little Britain. And so like, What happened? Have we all just become more woke, or what's like? How did we not know that wasn't okay? But is that an unbearably sort of liberal thing?
No.
How did we not know?
It gets to the crux of a phrase that is so often used, but I don't think people really take the time to look at what it actually means, which is, let's, for this example, say they didn't know any better. People think that's like a kind of sort of a shrug off of it doesn't matter. They didn't know any better literally means if they had known better, they wouldn't have done it. And the reason I always bring that up is from a sense of compassion of people are ignorant until they know about things. And through empathy, and it's why this is a common theme with this show, until you're opened up to the impact of your words and your actions, you don't have that opportunity to change. And it's why the education system is really important at teaching compassion and empathy, because if you get to the root of that, people will then, by knock-on effect, not do things that are harmful to other people. It's why when I, especially with doing YouTube's Creators for Change initially, the remit was doing content that was dealing with hate crime, racism, xenophobia, hate speech. And I said, I'm not doing any content on those issues specifically. I'm doing it on critical thinking and empathy, because by dealing with those issues, you help prevent X, Y, and Z. Because people don't need to be told, don't be racist. Because people that are racist don't think they are. They think it's because you always hear the thing of, "Oh, I didn't mean it like that," or it was only a joke, and all these sort of things. And
it's I think people who, and I understand, although I don't agree, I understand people getting hung up on intent. What was that? Oh, was it outside?
Oh yeah.
Sorry,
it's all right. We're in here.
So I thought, oh, no, what's happening?
No.
It's people who get hung up. We'll have to edit this a little bit out. Sorry.
No,
it's people who get hung up on intent. Like
when you say that, though, do you mean they put so much weight on intentions?
Yes,
matter?
I mean I didn't mean to be racist, therefore I wasn't.
Okay, yeah,
and
sure.
You go, okay, well I can accept the first bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the second bit is true. And that's why I mean, I think I think Matt Lucas's response to some of those Little Britain episodes, to all those Little Britain episodes, is I think the sort of the best response he can give, which is not apologizing or excusing them, explaining, but not trying to sort of say,
sure.
Oh well, it was okay back then. It wasn't okay, but he wouldn't do that now. They've changed. The world has changed, or at least in this country, the sort of stuff you put on TV has changed. We wouldn't do that now. Although I say we wouldn't do that now. I mean, there's still people, YouTubers blacking up and things, and every again at the time of recording, but at Love Island's just started, and one of the contestants has already a photo surfaced from a party they went to a couple of years ago where they blacked up to go as Mr. T, and people go, oh, it's fancy dress, I'm allowed to black up, and you go, oh yeah, you're not really, like, don't. But I think it's probably better to try to explain why you shouldn't, rather than just sort of go racist and like, you've done that once and now you're condemned forever. Whatever you do, you're racist, and that word defines you. Right, because no one word should define you in that way.
And it closes off the opportunity for them to even learn. People aren't willing to learn if they think, well, I'm not going to be forgiven.
Change and
which is why intention is important to the degree that you were mentioning, because if someone's
important, just not everything.
No, I agree with that. I'm just saying, building on that if someone says, what was the example you gave? If someone being racist, they said, it wasn't my intention. What was the second half? Because you agreed with the first half.
It wasn't my intention, therefore it's not racist.
Therefore it's right. Okay.
And it's that second bit that
that it was not my intention is a good indicator, because what it does is that gives an opportunity to have a learning moment and to actually disavow what had been done. But if they then go, therefore it's not racist, like that's literally thrown any opportunity for learning. But I always find this discussion difficult, because as a middle class white cis male that doesn't
but we sound so wanky saying that. Well, we just don't know as we're privileged, and we are privileged, but also you sound so like, what's the virtue signaling, isn't it? It's like, it sounds like you're virtue signaling by saying just that. But what I'm saying is that the idea of giving people a chance, I've not been wronged in that way, and so I think it's a harder case to make. Also, even though I think intellectually it shouldn't matter what my background is.
truth and the best method is the
about,
best
it's
method.
about, I think, giving. There was an instance recently where it's a Doctor Who thing, so I apologise in advance.
Oh no, I want to talk about Doctor Who.
I do.
As someone who is complete.
No, you don't. Well, no, we can, but like a lot of the work in the writing and journalism I've done over the last 20 years is Doctor Who based. It's all about Doctor Who. So, but there was, and it's quite rare that an opinion about Doctor Who or a viewpoint or a standpoint comes along that makes me go, oh, holy shit, I'd never thought. But and it sort of links in a bit with the sort of the Little Britain example, because I was kind of thinking as we were talking just then, well, sort of it's all very well for us to have watched Little Britain a few years ago and laughed our heads off, but what if you were like a black kid watching and you'd have seen David Walliams, Matt Lucas blacking up and doing those voices and the stereotypes, and it would have affected you probably quite differently. There was an American writer, a journalist whose name I've forgotten, so I apologise. But she wrote a piece about the symbol at the heart of Doctor Who, the one that even if you don't watch the show, is the TARDIS, that police box, and it's depicted frequently in the show as a beacon of hope. When the world's going to shit and then somewhere in the midst of the world crumbling, the TARDIS will dematerialise and out steps this magnificent man or woman, the Doctor, who will save the world. It's tapping into that sort of Superman, Jesus, all those sort of myths.
I think I know where this is going.
Yeah. Maybe, but the point that she made was that growing up as a young black American, this symbol of this beacon of hope being this box with police written on it. When a lot of black Americans, particularly, and young black Americans particularly, would not have the same relationship with that word, that as a white middle class guy watching Doctor Who and going, oh, well, police, that's it literally says on the front of the TARDIS, pull for I should know this off by heart, something like pull for assistance, phone for help. Like it's there to offer assistance and to save you in your hour of need. Like if you were a young
to serve
black
the
American,
community,
to serve the community, all those things, completely different. And Doctor Who was and is again now quite big in America.
Yeah.
And certainly, when this writer was growing up, I think it was the 80s, Doctor Who was having a real moment in America. Completely different connotations. I was just sat there reading this article going like, oh, shit. And so it's all about empathy. It's just the opportunity to read something written by, most people who write about Doctor Who are white middle class people, and just to read a perspective from someone who wasn't. You go, oh wait, I'm humbled. I've really learned something.
Sure.
It's made me, me think of my favourite show in a very different way. And that's empathy.
And that is the crux of it, which is it's not to say therefore you don't have a right to enjoy it anymore.
No,
it is.
Not at all.
Keep enjoying it, but it's just something to be mindful of, and it's enlightenment.
But also, it's just more. And I feel this way. Diversity and thinking or thinking from different people's perspectives, different people from different backgrounds. It's for all the discussion of how woke it might be, or how enlightened it might be, or whether you're virtue signaling. Put all that aside, and even just ignoring all of that, it's just more interesting. It's just more interesting to get different viewpoints. I mean, I got to the end of becoming YouTube, and was very proud of these 12 episodes I'd made. And at the end of the final episode, I did this thing where the credits rolled, and instead of just listing who had appeared in that episode, I listed all 103 cast members across the 12 episodes. And 101 of those 103 cast members were white. And it was only then I went, oh shit. And I sort of was able to maybe slightly justify it to myself by going, well, it's a YouTube, it's part documentary series about YouTube, and YouTube, certainly back then and still to a point today, is so white. And it was so white back then that it was sort of reflective of what YouTube was. But it did make me go, oh crap. And so in every project I've done since, when I did a documentary on sex for Channel 4 called Tofu, even as recently when doing a Doctor Who project for the BBC, where we got the BBC's Doctor Who magazine, where we got together a group of young people to watch old episodes of Doctor Who, basically. Like every time since, I've tried to just cast as diversely as possible, because when you get a group of people talking about anything, whether it's something as specific as Doctor Who, or as sort of broad and as messy as sex, whatever or YouTube or whatever, when you're interviewing people and you want different perspectives, There's no excuse just to speak to, straight white middle class people. Speak to them too, but because not to try and tick any boxes or to try and appear woke or anything like that, but just because you will have those moments where you sit back and go, I'd never thought of it in that way. I'd never thought of the TARDIS in that way. I'd never thought of, the different perspective of growing up as a young black gay man as opposed to, or whatever, just shit. And those moments, and I think that's what you're striving for partly on this podcast as well, is just wanting those moments where you're not your whole worldview, but just an aspect of your worldview, even if it's about a particular TV show, is just like you're blindsided slightly, and you have to take a moment to go, oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, I'd never thought of that before. I'll be thinking about that a lot over the next few months or year. Those things that just get into your head and go, yeah, that's a different perspective. And you're only going to get that if you open yourself up to talking to people who, even politically, I try very hard, and it is hard. Increasingly, it's hard because of everything that's going on politically at the moment. I try to still make sure I follow and I'm good friends with people who I really disagree with. And it is hard. Oh, it's so hard. I'm thinking of one person in particular who I won't name. But it's hard because you just, when people's livelihoods are at stake, and often when you're talking about things like Brexit or whatever, people's livelihoods are at stake.
Yes.
And it's serious. It's not just it is for the political elite, it might just be a bit of a game, but it's not a game for the vast majority of people. And so when you disagree with something on a subject,
Climate change
is an example. It's often hard to just argue it on an intellectual level or on a theoretical level, because it's like, yeah, but we might all die, it's why I do have, although I absolutely agree wholeheartedly with a woman's right to choose, and in terms of, God, why are we talking about this now? But I have a modicum of sympathy for the people who are sort of stood outside abortion clinics campaigning, and I say a modicum because, oh God, these words could come back to haunt me, because I think they're awful people and they're behaving like absolute dicks, and there's not really any excuse for it. But I understand, I suppose, that on some level, if you really believe that it is the sanctity of human life,
it's murder,
it is a human life, and you believe that if you don't, that a child could die. That's not how I see it at all, and I think that's a pretty disgusting viewpoint. But I do understand, at least, although I disagree with them completely. I think.
No, I actually...
I get that desperate. Same with people who don't eat meat and are as passionate about it. I do, but I get why you might really almost trip up and behave like a dick about it if it's something you care that passionately about, because it's a life or death sort of situation,
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
No. It was a good train of thought.
Have to cut some of this down.
Not at all. I had quite a lot to say on that. I don't want to jump all the way back. No. The one thing I was going to say, when you spoke about opening up to, well, it was throughout the whole thread of it, opening up to other experiences and speaking to people from backgrounds you haven't experienced yourself. It builds on from that old cliche that travel broadens the mind, because when that phrase was first employed, I don't know when it was, but it would have been at a time where to experience a different culture you physically had to move around the world, whereas now through the internet and also through diversity you don't have to travel that far.
I'd just say the unfamiliar broadens the mind is probably true, or is more apposite for 2019 perhaps, just I mean, go on one of those sort of, we've all done it, like a Wikipedia, what do they call it? There's a word for it when you get
rabbit hole.
Yeah, is that it? Maybe.
Down rabbit hole.
Even that will broaden them if you're just reading about things you never read about before, or watching I mean, that's why
I love documentaries.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, but it's why I love things like Spotify, like music taste. Now you'll experience different genres of most people, most young. Do I speak for young people here? I don't know. Most young people. I'm thinking, am I really young anymore? Not really. Most young people will have far broader music tastes.
Yeah.
That even something as supposedly unimportant as music, will have far broader music tastes than I would have when I was a teenager, because there's so much more out there that you have access to.
Yeah. Well, so I think the brain is like the vocabulary that you work with is just constantly multiplying through these different experiences. And there was a great phrase I learned when I studied psychology, which is when learning language, which was about how grammar is the infinite use of finite language.
Right, sure.
And so by exposing yourself to different experiences, you actually, not grammar, but kind of, if we think of experience in that similar sort of way, it upgrades the toolkit of your mind.
Yeah.
And it means that when you come across new problems, you'll be better at, because you'll be thinking bigger picture and different people. I mean,
but also it can tap into sort of what we were saying. Sorry to interrupt you, but it can sort of tap into what we were saying a while back about making things sort of more what were we saying? More sort of familiar and more usualized. Maybe were we talking about that? But I'm thinking of there was sort of, if you're going to fight racism or homophobia, transphobia. I mean, one of the best ways of soaps are great at doing it. That a character like Haley in Coronation Street, for instance, a trans character.
Right. Oh yeah,
introduced sort of, I don't know when it was, about 15 years ago.
Do you know what? Actually, it's interesting you say that.
That wouldn't necessarily say that they were great advocates for trans. I don't know what I don't really understand that sort of trans rights, trans people. I don't understand it, and yet you'll get people. And Coronation Street tends to be the sort of show that will be watched by slightly older generations who might not be quite as au fait with I'm generalising, but might not be quite as au fait with trans or LGBTQ rights.
And it's a soap opera for the international audience. Although, do they have soaps like that in America? Like, I
don't know.
Because it's daily, the Coronation Street and EastEnders and things like that.
Probably that. I think because it's equally as applicable if it's US shows. I mean, like the Disney Channel, I think has recently introduced it in one of its kids shows.
It's really interesting.
Gay characters.
But it's interesting
like
you mentioned Haley, because I think that is one of my first
of a trans.
Oh, yeah,
person.
I think so. Like, because I was very little.
And that's what I mean about the sort of doing that a bit like we're trying to do with Becoming YouTube, of sort of reeling people in with one thing and then giving them something else. That's what it was. That you, if Coronation Street had sort of gone, well, we're going to tackle trans issues and trans character, which they sort of did a bit, but they also just introduced a character who had many different storylines and was just a great, really likable character who fell in love with Roy from the CAF. I don't watch Coronation Street. I'm just trying to remember when I caught it in the background while my parents would watch it. But it was just that sort of, it's about utilizing something. It's about reeling people in with one thing and then allowing them to fall in love with someone or something or a topic and giving them something they didn't know they wanted. Again, it's like a lot of Coronation Street viewers would not have said, whenever it was in 97, 98, whenever it was that she was introduced, Haley, they wouldn't have said, oh yeah, what Coronation Street really needs is trans issues and trans representation. Sure. It would have got all the criticism that it would have got, the box ticking woke, liberal sort of, virtue signaling sort of criticisms had they done it like that. And it probably did get some of those criticisms back then, but by just making her a really great character that people fell in love with, they were able to usualize or normalize trans people, trans relationships. But that's the best way to do it by far. Same with racist, that is why it's important. The more sort of black faces, you know what I mean, black or Asian or ethnic minority faces that we get on screen in dramas, in comedies, you'll want to make sure that your guest roster, by the time you've got 50 guests, you'll want to make sure that you've got a mixture of men and women and people from different backgrounds. The more we do that, the more that people listening to and consuming media will just become used to that. Just used to it. That's the best way to fight any kind of racism, homophobia.
Totally. I mean, in its essence, this is the sad fact. It's about normalizing normality. Yeah. Like, it is about making things that are just in society normal, but because there's been this massive discrepancy, that's why it's becoming an issue.
Well, I was always told as well to use, because I always use that word normalizing, until like the other year I went to my friend's book launch, a guy called Ollie Pike, who's written a series of LGBTQ books for like primary and secondary, maybe just primary schools, and they're really good. They're doing that thing of what I thought was normalizing like gay relationships for primary school children, which has been in the news quite a bit recently, and part of the discussion at this launch event was we shouldn't use the word normalizing. Apparently, another word we shouldn't use.
I don't like using it, which is why I only used it in that context.
For the reasons that I'd never thought of it. But again, you learn, I suppose. But was told usualizing is a far better word, and I like this idea that usualizing is a better word, because
familiarising,
normalizing suggests that, yes, or familiarizing, because normalizing suggests that there's something abnormal about what's like, different. There's not. It's just usualizing something.
It's like when you talk about people with certain conditions, and then you say, and then you've got people with this condition, and then normal people, average people. It's...
Yeah, and you go, no, you should always try and avoid that. Although we all do. And again, I think often I found when doing after I did the tofu sex documentary, I got to be on a few panels at things like Somewhere in the City, where we talk about sex. And whenever you're talking about sex and sexuality and gender and all that, you have to be so careful. And often I do what we sort of forgot to do with in this, maybe, which is fine. But like I'd sort of say at the start of the conversation, look, like for all of us on, just give us the benefit of the doubt, because some of the things we all of us will say the wrong things, like here and there. We'll use the wrong word, or we'll be a bit clumsy with our language. But just like putting it out there as a disclaimer to start with, like, just give us the benefit of the doubt. And that's what you don't get too often on in a lot of discourse on things like Twitter and YouTube comments. People don't give you the benefit of the doubt. You fuck up, you use the wrong word, you say the wrong thing, and people will just leap on it.
Well, it's because society has become so much about social status, because it's now...
You mean, I'm better than you because I know...
Well, no, I mean in terms of... Well, that comes to it, but in terms of, because everything is now data-driven of how many followers and likes you've got, we've now put more of a value on... what your social status is as metrics.
Yeah.
And what it means is, because we put so much focus now on what people's social status is, it's the easy target of how do you destroy someone whose credibility you want to undermine.
Yeah.
And it's why I think when people make mistakes, people feel like it's an open goal.
Yeah. Unless you saw, although we've seen this kind of raft of politicians particularly, and there's a particularly prominent one in this country, as there is in America, who sort of have made they've sort of found the solution, your Borises or your Trumps, like, may as well name them, where they've made so many mistakes, so many fuck ups, that they sort of then become, it's like sort of Teflon, or they nothing sticks, because they can't be brought down. Things that I know when growing up, if a politician or public figure had said that thing, that would have been their career over, or at least career over for a decade, or until they can reinvent themselves and come back. Whereas now you get, Trump being the perfect example, but almost too extreme an example, but certainly people like Boris, who just can sort of do and say almost anything, because fuck-ups no longer stick.
And I have a very similar attitude, but from the other end of what I want to see happen with society. I don't want to see society where everyone keeps getting caught so much that we don't care anymore. I want it that people become so open about their mistakes and how they've learned from it that we therefore don't...
Yeah.
We see these as opportunities for people to change.
Well, you know what we should bring back? We should bring back the apology.
Oh, the apology.
Well, I think no, but seriously, I think it's become...
But now everyone says, oh, that wasn't an apology. And now I get
because
it when...
of Twitter discourse, though, it means that... And exactly what you were saying about sort of social status, wanting to bring people down. People see an apology as a sort of a sign of weakness. Also because an apology it's sort of an agreement between two people that I will apologize for a thing, and you will, graciously accept that apology, so we can draw a line under it and move on. Whereas now people aren't apologizing because they sort of know that people won't accept that apology. It's like, you've done the bad thing, so now that's it. Like, there's no return. There's no, like I felt, we might talk about, I don't know, but like, so some of the, so YouTube was quite ahead of the curve, in so many ways. YouTube was ahead of traditional media, and it was ahead of traditional media when it came to Me Too, really. YouTube had its big Me Too, where a number of YouTubers here and in America, but particularly here, I think, were exposed for doing all sorts of awful things. And that happened about a year and a half before Hollywood did its Me Too movement.
I think it was a bit longer than that, because I remember
a couple of years,
because becoming YouTube was done as I just stopped doing YouTube. Well, I took a break because I was having this, like, I think the steam was running out for me. And I remember when I was out of it, and then I had my head injury, I sort of came back, and I was hearing all these stories, and the ones that I knew about were people that I'd known personally. And obviously there was a lot, but I was. But you're right. It was before Hollywood,
and it sort of it kind of, and a lot of it got in there before Hollywood, before traditional media. But a lot of the discourse at the time was from people sort of saying, well, someone's done a terrible thing. It definitely is a terrible thing. There's not much disputing that. So then, like, they have a response, or they owe it to the rest of us, I don't know, to leave the platform and never return. And I found myself sort of agreeing with, like, 80-90% of the argument, but the sort of the kind of people fucked up and that's it. There's no return. There's no. And I also, on the other side, and I know that no apology would have been adequate for me, so I don't quite know what the people could have done, but I also recognise that saying to people, you are a bad person, that's what you are now, that's what you are and will be forever, and you need to leave this platform and never return, like you're banished from the kingdom. It's sort of, it's pretty...
I know one of the people...
It doesn't really open itself to discourse, does it?
Agreed. There was one of them, I won't name in particular, had said on one of their videos, so what do you want from me? And the way that they said that, I didn't agree with, or the tone. However, the question I would always have is, if you are going to be throwing stones, like, I wasn't really involved in the conversations, but I didn't like the mob mentality. Doesn't matter if mob mentality is justified or not. It's nothing constructive is going to come out of it, or maybe justice in terms of getting the truth out there. But the question I always would have for people is, what does a path for redemption look like? Because if you're not going to answer that, what you're saying is these people are indefinitely bad and there's no hope for them.
And there's no hope for them, and they're unforgivable. And yet also, this was something,
and that might be the answer to some cases, but
possibly. But this is why I sort of. Oh God, I was about to say I was sort of lucky in that becoming YouTube. Although that sounds as if I'm trivializing various YouTubers sexually assaulting people, which I'm not, or making it about me, which I don't mean to. But as an aside from everything else, I that 12-part becoming YouTube, I uploaded the final episode just in time, which is a horrible, clumsy phrase, so I apologise. But there was one YouTuber, again, let's not name him for the minute, I suppose, but there was one YouTuber who people had come forward and said he'd done various bits and pieces. He was in Becoming YouTube. The final episode hadn't gone up, so I edited him out of the final episode, but he wasn't in it much.
All right.
But had then a few weeks later, it was just a few weeks later, it was a number of other high-profile cases. Some of which, because this, Becoming YouTube was a documentary about the UK YouTube community, were in Becoming YouTube. And yeah, I mean, I'd have sort of been fucked. I'd have had to just stop the series because they were in it and would film loads of stuff, or go away and spend 6 months reworking and re-editing things. And so in that sense, I was lucky. But I also realised that, obviously, give me the benefit of the doubt if you're listening.
No.
It sounds like I'm making
totally
it about me.
What you say. Because that was one of the questions I wanted to ask, and you
couldn't
did
have
answer
a discussion as part of Becoming YouTube. How could you? Because, sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I was going to ask this on the podcast, and you sort of answered it earlier because you said that it's still up there for people to watch. Because the question I was going to have was, after all of this came out, do you feel leaving it up there is an okay thing to do? And just before it seems like I'm just putting all this question on you, I used to do Stick Aid, which, for those of you that don't know, it was a 24-hour live broadcast done every year to raise money for UNICEF. Started in my bedroom on a laptop, and it ended up being done in a TV studio. And there are people on those that were some of the people we speak about, and they're still up. Some have been uploaded by other people. I have no control of it. But the question is, do you then have a responsibility to take down all the content because of those associations? I don't even know if I have the login details to do that.
I did think about this, like at the time. But if I'm honest, I thought about it for all of about 2 minutes and thought, no, it stays up. Because there was one video. There was one sort of extra little. I'd made 2 or 3 extra little episodes of Becoming YouTube, and one of them was about a band, a YouTube band. 3 out of the 4 of whom were accused of sexual assault. As it was just about that band and just about the 4 of them, I sort of thought, well, that I will take down. So I took that one down. Other than that, though, no. I mean, it would be partly it's like it feels like it's sort of, I don't know, it's hiding. Again, it's shutting down discussion. I'd prefer that those episodes stayed up as a sort of a time capsule document of YouTube as it was back then, warts and all, and prompted discussion than And also, do you know, it was 3 people, I think, asked whether I'd be taking it down. And all 3 of the people who asked, I mean, people on online and things, I've only ever had 3 comments. And all 3 said, I hope you're not taking it down. I just wondered if you would. I even have mixed feelings about the BBC taking down, I mean, I suppose it's for the best, taking down lots of like Top of the Pops episodes and things with, because it's sort of anyone now watching all those Top of the Pops rerun, you can't show a Top of the Pops rerun with someone like Jimmy Savile. Not that any YouTuber was as bad as Jimmy Savile, but
there is a difference.
You are whitewashing it a bit, aren't you? Pretending it didn't happen.
There's a difference between republishing or rebroadcasting and leaving it if it's already been published. Yes. It's like the debate around musicians that have done bad things. Can you still enjoy their music? This is a very simplistic way of looking at it, but generally the way I approach it is, if you still have a connection with the songs that they did from a time that you enjoyed it and these things weren't known about, I can understand that. Obviously there are some bands or musicians where stuff has happened where I feel repulsed, and so I wouldn't want to anyway. But if you keep supporting them afterwards, I think like Chris Brown as an example, again, the conversation about redemption and stuff, I don't know anything. I don't even listen to him anyway, so it's not even a conversation worth having from me, because I'm not that informed on him, what he did, and sort of where he is on his journey now. But I would find that a much harder case to keep supporting people after. But
then it's tricky, because the music royalties work, I mean, not a million miles off how YouTube. I mean, the truth is, gosh, how much do I make from YouTube AdSense now? It's like 10 quid every 6 months or something. But I'm nonetheless making money from episodes of Becoming YouTube, which feature people who now you wouldn't cast in anything now.
Right.
Now, also, look, each episode of Becoming YouTube had a cast of dozens, and it might be 1 person or 2 people. But
and that is the difference from what you were saying about the episode where it was 3 out of 4.
Like, and I don't know. It's almost an unanswerable question. I think most people, you've just got to do you, haven't you? If you find yourself, like, you shouldn't beat yourself up for humming a Michael Jackson song or something. At the same time, you probably wouldn't put a Michael Jackson song in a new movie or TV show or something that was coming out. I think that the issue I had slightly with some of the Top of the Pop stuff is that the sort of, I understand not maybe showing, you're right, you wouldn't air an episode featuring certain individuals, wouldn't air that on TV now. But if you go onto like the BBC's website and read up about the history of Top of the Pops, it's as if Jimmy Savile was never part of it.
Oh, really?
And that's where it makes me a bit uncomfortable. That sort of, say in sentence 1, yes, he was part of it, and he turned out to be a paedophile. He turned out to be one of the worst, the most horrific people ever to work in British broadcasting. But don't pretend he didn't.
They literally removed, wow.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was, and it's that sort of, anything that kind of closes down discussion does make me quite uncomfortable. And certainly a lot of the sort of the just holding people, not even holding people to account, just sort of, I mean, John Ronson writes, but I'm sure you've read, like, so you've been publicly, what's it called? So you've been publicly shamed. Yeah. Which is really great, book about this subject, where it's about some people who did do bad things and other people who sort of didn't but got flack anyway. But whether or not you did, he sort of asks the question, well, what is it? We need to be honest with ourselves, I think, about what people want. What is it we want when we, demand that someone's axed or something's taken down or someone's never employed again, or what is it we actually want? Again, at the time of recording, but there was Piers Morgan, just a Life Stories with Michael Barrymore, who was one of the big entertainers on TV, big, Saturday night.
Is he still doing them?
Well, no, because about whenever, I'm trying to remember when I was a kid, but like he was the big sort of Saturday night entertainment star when I was a kid.
Talking about Piers Morgan.
Oh, Piers Morgan.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I didn't know if he was still doing those shows.
Yeah. I mean, he's obviously an awful human being, Piers Morgan, but he's a very good interviewer. And a pretty good journalist. And his interview with Michael Barrymore was sort of it's quite eye-opening, because it's a guy who sort of, it reminds me a lot of the stuff that John Ronson writes about, where someone sort of did a bad thing or was caught up in a bad thing in his case, rather than actually did it. And so we need to ask, well, what is it people want? Well, he shouldn't be on TV again, but it's not just that, is it? He should, and he should be held to account. Well, how? Oh, well, he should be sort of sent to. I mean, what you sort of it boils down to is he should die. Yeah, we should string him up and hang him publicly and put his head on a spike. What is it we want?
Revenge. People
and
want revenge.
Really want people sort of want revenge. There's no way that there's no room for redemption. There's no room for apology. There's no room for understanding and discussion. And finally now, however many years later, with Barrymore, 15 years or something later, this interview, a lot of people were, it was a fantastic interview, and part of what people liked, which I've only caught bits of, but part of what people liked about it was that it sort of was talking honestly. It felt it was talking honestly about it, and it gave him room to apologise, but apologise in a broader context about what sort of happened to him personally, all that. And that's a discussion that, imagine if we'd been able to have that discussion at the time, even becoming YouTube-y things. I'm able to talk about it a bit with you now, but I couldn't have talked about it 6-7 years ago. Wouldn't it have been great if we could have talked about it? Tried a couple of times on stage at things like Summer in the City and VidCon to sort of talk about, someone asked a question. I remember we did a sex ed panel, one I mentioned earlier. And someone asked a question. It was me and people like Lex was on it, Tom Scar was on it, and somebody asked a question about, what was the question? I think it was something like, my friend is showing sort of signs of having behaved really badly towards young women or young women. You guys on stage, you knew, as part of the YouTube community, you had friends who behaved badly. Yeah. How did you deal with that? We sort of went to start answering the question, and it was shut down by the moderator.
Really?
It's not. I don't think, and actually the emphasis shouldn't be on, it should be on the survivors of sexual assault rather than the friends of people of the perpetrator. And you go, yeah. I mean, I suppose, yeah, fair point. I was quite quiet, and Tom as well. I remember being really upset. We were quite quiet for the rest of that panel, and afterwards, I think we complained actually, and some in the city sort of, I think they took the panel down from online, everything, because it was really badly handled. It was like, this person's perfectly great, legitimate question had given us an opportunity to talk about something quite difficult but important. Because sure, it is, if you think that your friend is behaving in a really shitty, that is a legitimate position to find yourself in, because people do.
Yeah. And
knowing how to handle it. But what a valuable discussion that could have been for the community at a community event like Summer in the City, which I keep mentioning. So if you don't know, listening at home, it's a big old YouTube event, isn't it?
It's like a convention for YouTube, but it's
lots of YouTube viewers getting together and talk. Lots of panels and things, as well as your meet and greets and photo ops and things. And it's an opportunity to talk about some of the issues affecting the community. And they blew it. What a great question. We could have given really interesting answers about it, but they were sort of too scared. Hard to talk about things until years later, when it's sort of interesting, but not nearly as useful as it would have been to talk about it at the time. But people are too scared, perhaps with good reason, to talk about difficult things at the time, and that just limits the potential for empathy.
It's because
I've dragged it around. Yeah, podcast. It's like almost went off on one there.
Well. The human brain has sort of two elements. It's the old brain and the new brain. So the old brain is very threat-based. It's the animalistic tendencies we have to react to fear, anger, all these quite innate impulses, whereas the new brain is the frontal cortex, our ability to rationalize and have compassion and think about things through. And we always look at that on an individual basis of how do we not go on impulse of being angry to other people. How do we just take a pause, think about it, what's going to be useful in this situation? But I think that needs to happen at a much more societal level for a lot of...
Here's something I want to ask you as well, actually, because something I've found myself over the course of this podcast, it's like almost sort of apologising for a couple of times. But I try to stop myself apologising for as time goes on, because I think it's quite an important thing to do, and it's this, that I sort of find myself apologising for making certain things about me. And you go, and I know that, especially when you're talking about sensitive topics, you shouldn't necessarily make stuff about you and try and relate it to your own life. But also, any of us, and most of us, I hope, are striving to be sort of more empathetic. What the fuck are you supposed to do but make it about, relating things to you? If people are trying to understand things which are somewhat outside their own sphere of experience, on some level, without being a dick about it, but on some level, shouldn't we try to make it think, well, actually, okay, I don't know what it's like to have grown up in this set of circumstances or to have experienced this, but I have experienced that, which isn't the same, but it's not entirely dissimilar. So if I think about how I felt when I was experiencing that, will it help me empathise better with someone who's had this experience, which is different? I don't know that it's necessary. You know, we all very keen, maybe it's just a Twitter thing, but especially online on Twitter and things, to say, yeah, stop making it about you. It isn't about you. You go, yeah, I mean, yeah, but maybe if we all just tried making things a bit more about us more of the time, do you think maybe... So I'm asking you, Myles. Do you think maybe that would allow us to empathise more?
Well, that's the key word. I think it's not about making it all about me, but about us. And so it is about both components. And a great example for that would be if someone is going through adversity or is really troubled or had just something horrible happen in their life. The unhelpful thing to say to them is, I know how you feel. Whereas the helpful way of doing it is saying, like, I could imagine how it feels, or I've had something similar. But you know, it's about how you navigate it, and because you don't want it to be all about you, but you do want to have that shared experience expressed. And so I think it's just about being mindful, and just taking that extra 3 seconds with anything before engaging. And I think it's one of the reasons I hardly use Twitter anymore. I say I don't. I still use it from time to time for the odd post.
I love it. I just think it has such potential. It has potential.
You're always on my feed when I log back on talking politics and
all the things that, like, everything almost that we've discussed, like and striving for empathy and about knowledge and having sort of all the world's knowledge, you know, just on your phone. All those things, like Twitter has the potential to be the best example of all those things. And yet, all too often, it sort of becomes one of the worst. But I can see the potential with Twitter to be such a force for incredible good.
And that goes back to the old brain.
It hasn't quite got there yet.
That's the old brain, new brain thing. So that the bad side of Twitter is the old brain of anger, people trying to, I always say it, funnel all their emotions into a short, punchy thing where it's about going, you know, if you have a conversation that is not, you know, an hour, 2 hours long, and you're debating someone, you're only going to go for low-hanging fruit. You are going to mischaracterize them, because all you want to do is, the objective of that conversation is to come away with a win, not to come away with a sense of enlightenment.
Well, I think that's, you know, and Twitter is just reflective of, you know, is it reflective of society as a whole? I mean, it's certainly reflective, I think, of maybe I'm thinking as I'm speaking of the political landscape at the moment is much like that, where you're sort of, exactly as you say, you're kind of going for the win at the expense of everything else. So it's very tribal now. And it's very like, you know, we've seen it all with Brexit. It's like the point is to win the argument, is to not look at that grey area in between where you go, well, actually there are some advantages and some disadvantages, but it's no, you're gonna nail your what's the expression? Put your flag in the, you know, the one, and you know, and stick to that, and you know, we all know it tends to now go viral when someone changes their mind, because it's so rare. You know, it'll be a Twitter moment. It'll be a viral video where, look, this person voted in this way, and now they've changed their mind. They'll be on the news. People will be on the news for changing their mind. This person did vote this way, and now, or they used to believe this, and now
it's happening in America.
They've changed them, and everyone.
They were an Obama supporter, and now they voted Trump. They're now a Trump supporter, and now they're going to vote Democrat.
Say it again. I don't understand. How? Say it again. You know, whereas we should all be changing our minds all the time in a better world. Like, we should all be just, you know, changing your mind is. But it's like because Doctor Who. There's a Doctor Who quote for this. I'm trying to remember it. It's changing your mind is just intelligent way of thinking. Google Doctor Who changing your mind. I can tell you which episode it is. It's from the Zygon invasion. The Doctor gives a speech about just, you know, go on, what changing your mind. Doctor Who quote.
Here we go. So the Doctor says, how many hearts will be broken? How many lives shattered? How much blood will spill until everybody does what they're always willing to have to do from the very beginning? Sit down and talk. Listen to me. Listen. I just want you to think. Do you know what thinking is? It's just a fancy word for changing your mind.
That's it. Do you know what thinking is? It's just a fancy word for changing your mind. And people who resolutely will stick to their argument and won't be willing to just entertain the notion of changing your mind aren't thinking. And if none of us is thinking, then we're all doomed.
And it goes
doomed, Myles.
When well,
and cut there. Isn't this supposed to be an optimistic podcast?
Well, no.
I feel it's been quite depressing.
No, no. But the thing I would always say is when I have conversations with people, if I'm talking about the issues at hand, they say, "Myles, you're such a pessimist," and then I say, "But that's not because I've not talked about
realist.
I've not talked about what solutions there are to solve it." But then when I go into conversations and I talk about all the solutions and potential we have, they go, "Oh, you're such an optimist." It's like because I've not talked about what's at stake.
I mean, I think I'm an optimist on a day-to-day level. I'm late for everything because I'm an optimist. I think I'll leave, with 10 minutes.
You're on time today?
I was just about, yeah, but I mean, I'm usually late for stuff because I just kind of think, it'll be fine. I'm an optimist in that. Things will work out okay, except when it comes to like global issues. I think we're fucked. I think we're so fucked. It's the only way I can relax and not go mad with it all. You switch on the news now and it's like, oh God. The only way I can not just want to curl up under a duvet and not bother getting up in the mornings is by reminding myself we're fucked and there's nothing that I can do about it. There's little things I can do to make it better. I'll probably be all right. Like our generation is probably... No, I think... I think we were born... I mean, in some way, maybe our parents financially were like better off, but they didn't have wonderful things like the internet. So I think being born when around about in that 10 years, I know I'm a bit older than you, but like we were born in roughly the same sort of period. I think it's the best time to be born. Kids being born now are fucked. They're really going to feel the brunt of global warming. And like, I at least sometimes think to myself, you know what? If Trump presses that button and nukes us all, I've had a bit of an innings. You and I mean, we're in our 30s now, right? You in your 30s? Yeah. Like, that's all right. There are kids now, 13, 14. Like, what? If Trump pressed the button, they haven't even started. I've had a good few years of being able to go out and get pissed and have a laugh with my mates. So if we're all nuked tomorrow, ultimately, I'm all right.
So going back to what you said earlier, is this the real Ben speaking? Or
this is absolutely real. I comfort myself at least once a day. I mean, I try and watch as much late night American, Steve Colbert and stuff like that, because just hearing about how awful a lot of stuff is over in America just makes me feel a little bit better about how awful things are here. Because at least I can laugh and go, ha, that's funny, that joke about Trump. At least I'm not in America. I love America, but at least I'm not there. And then you watch the news and you're reminded of what's happening here and you go, it's no better. Like by the time this goes out, Boris Johnson will be our Prime Minister. Hey! We're all fucked. We're all so fucking fucked. And I said to you before we started this podcast, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah,
it's fine.
No, and I could tell.
Went, but don't worry, I'll try not to.
Because it was your catchphrase.
We're so fucked. Oh, God, aren't we, though? I mean, there's no hope.
So the way, and before we wrap this up...
Where are we going to take this podcast? It doesn't matter. We're all fucked. Just make the most out of it over the next few months, weeks. We're all fucked.
So what I would counter that with is I think the stakes have never been higher. I think we have an existential crisis on our hands. And the challenge of our generation, that includes you and I, is...
I'm a millennial, just.
Yeah.
I looked up the definition, and by like 2 years, I'm at the very much the older end of millennial, but it counts.
But the challenge of our generation is...
Millennials.
Is, are we able to reach global consciousness, not just in terms of compassion, but in terms of knowledge and a willingness to be problem solvers before we go over the cliff edge? Because it's not just about... we'll have technology to sort out climate change and things like that. Like, we are going through all of the Earth's resources by August every year.
Well, we're going to, in our lifetime, growing up, I mean, even just doing like little projects in primary school where you'd have to go and collect litter from outside to learn about the environment. And it was always like, it was always a sense of something for the future. But now, in our lifetimes,
protect future generations, you were told at school.
We're going to get to the point where it'll be too late. It might be already in some regard. It's just, we're so used to, we've got this amount of time left. And as terrifying as it might be to hear, we've only got 10 years or 12 years left for whatever.
Sure.
For most of our lives, if we live to a reasonable age, most of our lives, over half our lives, the answer will be, no, it's too late. We're now, all we can do is strive towards things to make life more bearable in this regard, or to try and reverse this, or but no, ostensibly it's too late.
No, I agree. I agree with some of that. To end with a relatively positive or hopeful note.
Go on, good luck.
Only because you challenged me to do that. We are currently living through a time of damage control.
Yep.
So there's a lot of things happening at the top levels where we have a society that has associated wealth and power with accumulation of resources, where we now have generations growing up that don't own a lot and therefore they have nothing to lose and everything to fight for. And what we need to do is organise, because I think a lot of what I see as negative things happening in our politics is the lashing out of a dying animal trying one last time to maintain control of what used to be. And I think there is a much more forward-thinking, progressive, and I don't mean that in the political sense, I mean forward-thinking, tech-savvy generation that is really willing to be problem solvers and think outside the box.
Well, I think politically as well, that is something I've tried to comfort myself a bit with, in all seriousness, that sort of seeing, I mean, I remember when Trump was elected or whatever, you kind of go, it feels like, it feels like recently as well, things have got worse in terms of sort of, women's rights and LGBTQ rights and all that sort of stuff. Sort of going, well, is it, I hope, I'd like to think, I'm not sure I do think this, but I'd like to think that maybe it's because we've got so far that this is sort of the final death throes of something. It's the monster rearing its head one final time. I'd like to think that. I don't know if that's true, but it's sort of like, you're at boss level now on
I think it is true, because
history.
If we don't defeat it, then it's game over. And there was the old cliche of how does the world unify, or how do we have global empathy? If we got attacked from aliens, all the countries in the world would unite to fight.
I hope they don't come now. And look
threat.
Away. Now's not the time.
No, yeah. They're probably like, no, leave them to it.
Now is not the time.
But I do believe that if we do see an existential threat, the cliche of saving us from ourselves, I think that could be a force. But again, I just want to preface to say that just because I have hope for these potential outcomes, it's not to say that our lives are currently on the line, because I think everything is at stake, and I think that is what is required for a global society to finally say, you know what, it's now or never, because it really
I've
is.
often thought that you mentioned aliens. I have, because also my love for Doctor Who has informed this perhaps, but like I often think like maybe the solution, the best solution, like now's the time. Maybe now is the time. If aliens if aliens pop down right now with like a threat to invade, that's our answer. That would make us all think, screw borders and screw race.
Oh no,
and
that's exactly the point.
That is what if this is all that will unify us. Aliens, all right, bring it on. Alien invasion. You've persuaded me. I'm down.
On that though, Ben, thanks so much for coming down,
right.
dude.
Thanks so much.
It was a great conversation, and I'll see you around.
It.